One of my favorite things is to snack on cherry tomatoes fresh from the plant. But I can only do this during the growing season. How about getting an opportunity to enjoy these delicious cherry tomatoes all year round? Join me today as I show you how I freeze dry my tomatoes. Hi, I'm Gardener Scott, and for most of the season in summer, I harvest the cherry tomatoes that I can use for a single meal or to snack on while I'm harvesting them. But at the end of the season, I end up with a big harvest. I'll go out to the many tomato plants I have and pull off dozens and dozens of delicious cherry tomatoes. On a daily basis, it's easy to just eat 10 or 12 cherry tomatoes. But when you have dozens, even hundreds, freeze drying can be a great way to preserve the harvest and still enjoy the delicious snack. These beautiful cherry tomatoes will freeze dry wonderfully. And while I'll primarily use them for snacks, at the end of the video I'll show you some other options and how to use them. The processing of these cherry tomatoes is pretty simple. After washing, I just cut them in half and then lay them on the sheet. I have enough of these tomatoes that it should be no problem filling this up. I've already done this with the orange tomatoes that I have. I had so many of the orange tomatoes that I processed this exact same way that I was able to fill up 2 of these trays with those tomatoes. And then I just stuck them in the freezer. Now, Harvest Right recommends that if you're going to freeze the food ahead of time, that it should be frozen for 48 hours before you put it into the freeze dryer. So that's my plan. I will add these to the freezer, and then they'll sit for 48 hours before I start the freeze drying process. I'll definitely get a full tray of these red tomatoes, possibly 2, but since I have so many more orange and yellow to harvest, that if I can't fill this up with red ones, I'll just fill up the remaining space with the other orange ones. It really doesn't matter. You don't have to keep the same color on the same tray. It just helps give me an idea of how many I'm working with. Now, it's important to stress that you don't need to wait until you have one big harvest of cherry tomatoes to put them in the freeze dryer. You can do it in batches. Go ahead and harvest what you have, cut them in half, put them on the freeze dryer trays, and then put them in your freezer. And do this until you have enough to be able to fill up the freeze dryer and do a freeze drying cycle. So I'm going to keep doing this, cutting and laying out, and in a couple days we'll be ready to do the freeze drying. The fresh tomatoes look fantastic, but they might even look more fantastic sliced and on the trays as I continue my harvests and cutting, because I know what's coming. And so with the Harvest Right freeze dryer loaded, now I'm just going to start the cycle. I'm not adding any time. I'm going to let it go fully automatic at this point with all of the default settings. In just under 18 hours, the tomatoes are complete. The freeze dryer is vented and ready to unload, so let's get these tomatoes upstairs and see what we have. The tomatoes have turned out pretty well, but on the red ones, it looks like, since these are such sweet tomatoes, some of that sweet liquid came out as a foam. And so there's this little white foam on some of the tomatoes. It's really quite sticky. That's why I think it's sugar. The tomatoes themselves are dry. They just have that little sticky foam on them. One of the best ways I've seen to show how the sugar expands and foams is with these freeze-dried Skittles from Harvest Right. You can see that each of the Skittles has actually expanded and it's all foamy inside. It doesn't look like a regular Skittle because the sweet inside has expanded. But the Skittles still taste like Skittles, sweet and delicious. And the tomatoes still taste like tomatoes, sweet and delicious. Now I have noticed that the red cherry tomatoes that had the foam, they were sweeter, do taste sweeter after freeze drying. The golden, orange, and yellow tomatoes have a very nice crunch, nice tomato flavor. They weren't as sweet to begin with. They didn't have that foaming, and they're not quite as sweet now. But both of these, you can see I can't stop eating them, make fantastic snacks. And I really think, at least with the cherry tomatoes, that's the best way to use them. For me, I've already gone through a full jar. All of those sliced tomatoes, the 4 racks that I put in the freeze dryer, gave me about 3 quarts once they were freeze dried. Delicious, delicious snack. But I'm going to do one more thing as a bonus for you to show you how you can use these tomatoes. I'm going to make tomato powder by pouring some of these freeze-dried tomatoes into my herb grinder. I'm going to grind up these tomatoes to make a delicious powder. And in just a few seconds, we have tomato powder. I'll go ahead and pour this out into a waiting bowl. So, let's taste it. Wow. It shouldn't be any surprise that it tastes exactly like the tomatoes that I've been snacking on. If anything, the flavor is more intense when you turn it into a powder. Now, you may be wondering, why would you want to powder tomatoes? Well, the intensity of the flavor, if you put it into a jar and sprinkle it on something like popcorn, makes the popcorn just absolutely explode. Put it on some scrambled eggs, you'll go crazy. You can sprinkle it on pizza. You can also use a spoon and put it into different soups and sauces that you might be making. It's a fantastic way to add flavor to your food. If you are already using tomato powder, tell me below how you use it, because I'm relatively new with tomato powder and I'm always looking for great new ways to use it. You can see that this first batch, using about a quarter of the jar, gave me a lot of powder. I'm going to go ahead and continue turning it into powder, and we'll see how much we can get. So this jar filled with cherry tomatoes, about 1 tray's worth, gave me almost exactly a cup of tomato powder, which I think is a pretty good investment, because this goes a long ways because the flavor is so intense. Now, I did try reconstituting the tomatoes in a couple different ways, taking some of these red ones and putting them into water, and they will reconstitute in water, but you lose some of the flavor. They do get pretty mushy, so it's hard to figure out exactly how much water to use. I had more success taking a number of these tomatoes and reconstituting them using Italian salad dressing. They weren't as mushy. They soaked up the flavor of the Italian dressing. By themselves, I prefer to eat them crunchy. But reconstituted with a salad dressing and then put into the salad, it was a nice option to be able to use these cherry tomatoes. But you just can't beat the snacking. And you can't beat the intense flavor of the powder. So what I'm going to do now is go ahead and take this powder. I'll put it into some shake jars like I did with my powdered pepper and powdered garlic, and just enjoy the flavor for as long as I can. If you want to see how I made the powdered chili pepper and powdered garlic, well, then go ahead and watch one of these videos next. I'm Gardener Scott. Enjoy gardening.